Presses in bookbinding are just one of the tools that remain mostly unchanged for the last 500 and more years. They are the backbone of any bindery and serve many purposes, come in all sorts of shapes and are incredibly useful for producing a beautiful and a functional book. I remember in the beginning when I didn't have a press, I just used some boards with weights on top to apply pressure to a book. This is still a viable method if you need to apply low pressure, but it's not the most comfortable way of doing other, more complex procedures. At one point, I set out to order a press from a local carpenter. As bookbinding in Bulgaria is quite direct craft, they didn't exactly understand the purpose of this contraption. In the end, it was considered a waste of time and the project rejected. It was the time to set out and try to make my own. At a hardware store, I found on sale a couple of defective solid beech table legs. They seemed like a good enough shape, and along with some metal screws and the helping hand of a friend, my first amateur laying press was made. Never did I imagine that this first try would prove so useful in time, and I happily continue to use it even now. It's not pretty, but it's sturdy and it gets the job done. I like to use it especially when I'm sewing on end bands. As you can imagine now, this certainly wasn't enough. I quickly saw how this construction lacks many features needed to help me produce my particular vision of a book, so this time I decided to entrust myself to a professional and ordered a finishing press and a sewing frame from a Dutch master carpenter. Before that I was sewing on a very sad self-made frame and was happy to make this change finally. The new press had a larger surface, a nice angle to help it work, and pegs for tying up. I realized how important it was for a tool to be touched by a master who knows what he's doing, not only with his own particular craft, but beautifully relating it to bookbinding at the same time. This press is invaluable for the later processes such as tying up when the leather has been applied, other general work on the book spine, or just to apply some pressure when a part of the book is drying. But later, the tragedy in my mind was that I had this beautiful finishing press, but I was still using boards and weights for bigger books. Once again, we set out with a friend to try to construct something, and the first nipping press was born sometime later. It did a marvelous job at first, but we soon realized how we didn't calculate how much pressure the book needs, and how the frame wasn't exactly built to take such pressure. It began to crack in its joints, and even though we tried to reinforce it, at one point it was evident that the replacement was needed. That's when I saved up some money and purchased this robot-built nipping press. It's a beautiful piece of equipment, with a proper screw, a nice working surface. I can apply just the right amount of pressure without worrying of damage being done to it. I also use it to do some linen prints from time to time. I still like to use the old one, however only for light pressure jobs. And at this point you might ask, what else would you need? Aren't these presses enough? Well, for a long time I was smoothing the edges of my books only with various grades of sandpaper. It produced an interesting finish, sometimes rough, sometimes smooth, but I wanted a quicker, less messy, and something that produced a smoother surface. In short, I wanted a laying press equipped with a plow, or plane as some call it. It consists of two devices, one being the press and the other holding a curved blade. You can press the blade into the book while cutting in both directions, and page after page you get a nice leveled and smooth edge. I got a very large press from great carpenters specializing in bookbinding equipment from England. Its size helps me work with much larger book formats. It's very sturdy and almost hard to work with due to its size and weight, but I'm quite fond of it. I happily use this press even for my smaller books until I got an offer for a smaller, similar press, this time with only one screw and raised on a platform. I was enchanted by the beautiful combination of mahogany and oak, the one screw that helps me keep one hand free to manipulate the book, and its additional boards that extend its uses even further. As of now, This press, as well as the nipping press, are my most used pieces of wooden equipment. They just cover a vast amount of uses, but that doesn't mean that my other ones remain forgotten. Every new book goes through almost all of them, and I would feel quite the loss if any of them weren't available by my side. This story may seem short and rapid, but in truth, this collection of presses took me around 7 years to complete. Proper equipment is usually expensive, and usually for good reason. It's a big investment, but with proper care, it's an investment made for life, and maybe even beyond. Who knows? Maybe my grandchildren will be leaving a few books to dry overnight some decades down the line. I'd also like to take this opportunity to show you my most recent work as well, finished with the help of my father, of course. It's a journal bound in red goatskin and decorated with something very peculiar. It's a technique that I felt inspired to try when I learned about the late master bookbinder Philip Smith. He used a material called marrow, and it's basically a leather parings and shavings molded into a solid mass that when cut produced a marbled effect, but from leather. This book features a border on both covers made with this material. It's also lavishly tooled in gold on the spine as well as the covers. It's also clad with some decorative silver fittings from my dad, and he did a marvelous job of making them beautifully fine and all of their attachments hidden below the cover. On the inside, the papers are from my own handmade paper, decorated with the recent linoprint design, again made by myself. You can learn more about this book through some links in the description. It's available for sale, and I'd be more than happy if someone finds him or herself in need of such an item. Thank you very much, and I wish everyone a wonderful week.